I'd always known she'd bring trouble. From the first day Bryce had brought her into the house, something elusive in her smile had made me wary. 43 years as an IRS inspector had taught me how to recognize falseness. Veronica Palmer exuded it with every fiber of her being. Now sitting on the veranda of my house in Fullerton, looking out over the manicured but unadorned garden, I wondered where I had gone wrong. Maybe I should have been tougher on Bryce when he was younger. Or maybe after Elizabeth's death I'd become too distant from my son, immersed in working grief. 68 years of life, and here I was, with a glass of whiskey, bitter thoughts and suspicions that turned out to be prophetic. The phone on the table vibrated. A message from Bryce. "We'll stop by tomorrow around 6 p.m. Nikki wants to discuss plans for the summer." Nikki. She insisted everyone call her that, even though her paperwork listed her as Veronica. Small manipulations were her specialty. "Nikki sounds friendlier," she said when I met her. I kept silent then, but I thought, why a friendly name for a person with such cold eyes? Our first serious conflict came at the engagement party. Bryce had announced it suddenly after only 3 months of dating. We were sitting at Lounge City, a fancy place Veronica had chosen. The prices were 3 times the usual, and the portions were half the size. "We've decided to get married," Bryce said then, holding Veronica's hand. His eyes glistened with excitement, like a child seeing the ocean for the first time. Veronica smiled that same smile, a perfect, rehearsed smile that didn't affect her eyes. "It's, unexpected," was all I could squeeze out. "Sonanim. You've only known each other for a short time. When you know, you know." Veronica cut me off. "Don't you, darling?" Bryce nodded like a dummy. "Dash, Mr. Abbott," she continued, leaning across the table toward me. "I understand your caution, but I love your son, and I will make him happy." I stared at my $80 steak, which tasted like cardboard, and thought about Elizabeth. What would she say? My late wife had an amazing intuition for people. "Of course," I finally answered. "If you love each other, just take your time." But they were in a hurry. The wedding was 2 months later, a modest one at Veronica's insistence, which surprised me. Later I realized she didn't want to draw attention to her past. No relatives on her side, just a couple of friends who kept aloof and disappeared right after the ceremony. Elizabeth had died of cancer 3 years before. Pancreatic cancer was a ruthless killer, giving no time to say goodbye. She complained of stomach pain in the morning, and 5 months later I was standing at her grave, not knowing how to move on with my life. Bryce was already in college at the time. He came to the funeral, held his ground but quickly returned to his studies. I didn't blame him. It's hard to face death at 22. My son had always been soft, malleable. Elizabeth used to say, "He's like water. He takes the shape of the vessel into which he's poured." As a child, this trait seemed endearing. In adulthood, it turned into a weakness. Veronica quickly found in him the perfect vessel. After the wedding, I tried to establish a relationship with my daughter-in-law, invited them to dinners, took an interest in her work in a travel agency, even helped with tax returns in the first year. That's when the first serious suspicions arose. "Veronica, these travel expenses, they seem excessive for a tax deduction," I remarked as I looked through her paperwork. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, tapping her long fingernails on the countertop. "These are work trips," she shrugged. "I have to know the resorts I offer clients. But spa treatments? Dinners at Michelin-starred restaurants? Part of the job," she cut off. "If you're not comfortable helping, I'll find another consultant." I signed the declaration, not because of her, because of Bryce, who looked at me pleadingly, but a warning. Be careful. The IRS isn't as lenient as I am. She laughed and patted my hand. "Don't worry, Daddy. I always know what I'm doing." Daddy! That address made my teeth clench. 5 years into their marriage, I'd never gotten used to it. Gradually, the visits became less frequent. Bryce called more and more in a hurry, speaking sloppily, as if someone was standing next to him, controlling every word. When they did come, Veronica dominated the conversation, talking about her clients, her travels, her plans. Bryce nodded and smiled, inserting the occasional comment. I was noticing a change in my son. New clothes. Too expensive and not his style. New phrases, as if memorized from glossy magazines. New ambitions, not his own, but imposed. My son, who used to work as a school history teacher, suddenly started talking about the private practice of tutoring children of rich parents. But you always wanted to work in a regular school, I reminded him during a rare private meeting. Veronica was away for the weekend with her friends, and Bryce showed up on my doorstep with a six-pack of beer. Times are changing, Dad. He leaned back on the couch, looking both relaxed and tense at the same time. There's more money in the private sector. Do you need the money? I asked bluntly. I can help. No, no. He shook his head too quickly. We're getting by. It's just, Nikki has big plans. What kind of plans? A bigger house, maybe a better neighborhood. Travel, life. I took a sip of my beer, trying to find the words. At 32, Bryce looked exhausted. There were shadows under his eyes and wrinkles of worry around his mouth. Bryce, are you happy? I finally asked. He looked at me as if I were speaking a foreign language. Of course I am, he answered after a pause. I have everything I need. That's not what I asked. My son looked away, staring at the family photo on the wall. The last one of all three of us. Me, Elizabeth, and 16-year-old Bryce on the beach in Santa Monica. Sometimes I miss the simple things, he admitted quietly. Remember when we used to go to baseball games? Or those Sunday breakfasts when Mom would make blueberry pancakes? We could still go to baseball games, I suggested. Nikki doesn't like sports, Bryce shook his head. He said it was a waste of time. I didn't say anything, but I heard a distinct, "What does Nikki like?" I knew the answer. Money, status, control. There was another incident that finally convinced me of Veronica's true nature. About 2 years ago, I was hospitalized with a heart attack. Nothing serious, as it turned out later. A warning to slow down and watch my cholesterol. But in the first few hours, the situation looked scary. Bryce rushed to the hospital immediately. Veronica showed up 3 hours later, impeccably dressed and made up, with a small bouquet in her hands. While the doctor was talking to us in the hallway, I noticed her slip into my room. She returned a minute later, just as Bryce was asking about my prospects. That evening after they left, I discovered my wallet had been moved. Not stolen, just lying in a different place than before. I checked the contents. The money was in place, the cards too. But something made me wary. The next day I called the bank and changed all the passwords. My intuition, developed over years of spotting tax cheats, rarely let me down. 3 days later, my card was used to make an attempt to pay at a jewelry store. The bank blocked the transaction as suspicious and called me. I told them I had not made the purchase. A new card was issued, the incident forgotten, officially, but I knew, and started watching more closely. The next 2 years were a series of petty confrontations and cold warfare between Veronica and me. She never showed open hostility, too smart for that. Instead, there were forgotten invitations to family events, allegedly casual comments about my age and health in front of Bryce, little lies and exaggerations that my son paid no attention to. Your father said we're spenders, she complained to Bryce over the phone, knowing I could hear the conversation during their visit. I never said that, I objected when Bryce looked at me questioningly. Well, not directly in those words, Veronica smiled, but we got the hint when you commented on my new dress. I only asked you what store it was from, nothing more. Gradually, my relationship with my son became more and more strained. We talked less often, the phone calls became shorter. At family gatherings, Bryce often looked like he was walking through a minefield, choosing his words carefully, casting nervous glances at his wife when he spoke to me. And now this message: we'll stop by tomorrow around 6 p.m. Nikki wants to discuss plans for the summer. I finished my whiskey and set the glass on the table. Summer plans. Veronica always had grandiose ideas that didn't fit their budget. Last year, she'd insisted on a trip to Italy. Bryce had quietly admitted afterward that they were still paying off the loan for it. It was getting dark. I rose from my chair, feeling my knees aching, a sure sign of the approaching rain. 43 years behind a tax collector's desk hadn't done my body any favors, but my mind remained sharp, perhaps even too sharp. I walked into the house, checking the locks before going to bed, a habit left over from Elizabeth's death. Back then, the emptiness of the house was deafening, and I created rituals to fill the evenings. Tomorrow I'll find out what Veronica's up to, and I'll be ready. After all, I've spent a lifetime identifying schemes and frauds. My sister-in-law may think I'm an old man out of my mind, but she's wrong. Some skills don't rust with age, especially the ability to see through people. The first signal was a notification from the bank. It arrived on my phone Wednesday morning while I was having breakfast on the veranda. Oatmeal, toast with peanut butter, black coffee, the same diet I'd had for the past 15 years. I was browsing the news when the phone rang softly. Confirmed transaction, $1 funds availability check, Royal Caribbean Cruises. I slowly set aside my toast. A cruise company? I'd never booked a cruise. Seasickness is one of the few weaknesses I admit openly. This was a test transaction. I was well aware of this tactic, a test before a major purchase. That's what scammers do, testing a stolen card. Or legitimate users, making sure the account works before a major spend. I didn't reject the transaction immediately. Instead, I called the bank, requesting a full report of recent activity on the card. The attendant, who introduced himself as Ethan, was polite and detailed. Mr. Abbott, other than this $1 authorization, there are no other abnormal transactions. This is probably a pre-check for reservations. Are you planning a cruise? No, I answered firmly. I don't. Would you like to block the card? I hesitated. My years of experience told me not to jump to conclusions. Gather information? Not yet. I want to track the situation. Can you tell me from which device this transaction was initiated? Unfortunately, this information is confidential. Professionally denied Ethan. But if you suspect fraud, we can start an investigation. No, wait, I stopped him. Let's do it another way. Don't block the card, but set up a notification of any attempted payments over $100. And I want information on when and where this card was first used to access the cruise company. Ethan hesitated a bit, but agreed. The advantage of gray hair and a calm, confident voice. People often go along to get along, even if it slightly violates protocol. After the call, I set aside my breakfast and headed to my office. Unlike most retirees, I hadn't abandoned technology. My job at the IRS required constant training in new systems, and the habit remained. The computer turned on with a quiet hum. I opened my email, then my online banking. The login was logged in last night at 21:32. I remembered exactly what time I'd been watching a rerun of an old detective show and hadn't logged into the banking app. Someone had used my data, but was smart enough not to change passwords or settings. I leaned back in my chair, putting the puzzle pieces together. Veronica and Bryce had come over for dinner 4 days ago Saturday. I made steak and potato gratin a rare culinary adventure. Veronica complimented my efforts with that special condescension reserved for old people trying to appear helpful. During dessert, I felt tired. Nothing unusual for a man of my years after a heavy dinner and a glass of wine. I excused myself and took a nap in the chair while he and Bryce cleared the table. I woke up to the sound of Veronica laughing as she showed Bryce something on her phone. "Did you sleep well, Daddy?" she asked with a smile, putting her phone away in her purse. At that moment, I didn't pay much attention to the gesture or to the fact that my credit card was on the dresser by the front door and not in my wallet. I always pulled it out before they arrived. Bryce sometimes forgot his, and I insisted on paying for groceries if they stopped at the store on the way in. But now the picture was coming together. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a notebook, an old-fashioned one with a spring on top. Writing down thoughts on paper is another habit not lost over the years. Digital notes could be hacked. The paper in my desk could not. I began to draw up a timeline of events. Saturday's visit. My nap from about 7 to 8:30 in the evening. Veronica's cell phone in her hands. My map on the dresser, in range. And now, 4 days later, a trial transaction from the cruise company. Veronica worked for a travel agency called Exclusive Travel. She specialized in luxury travel for wealthy clients. Cruises were her skate. She often bragged about her connections with cruise line managers. Obviously, she planned to use my card to make reservations. But why now? I remembered their last visit more closely. Bryce had mentioned that their wedding anniversary was next month. 5 years. A wood wedding, if tradition is to be believed. Veronica rolled her eyes gracefully then. Wood? How primitive. I always thought a 5-year anniversary should be marked with something special. Diamonds would have been better. Or a cruise, Bryce added with a nervous chuckle. Ashuramat, you've always wanted to try that new Caribbean itinerary, haven't you? On Royal Caribbean, she nodded, with a call at their private island. But it's too expensive for us now, dear. Maybe for the 10th anniversary. I remember the way she looked at me, as if evaluating. I thought at the time that she was hinting at a gift from me, but apparently she had a different plan. I turned on my tablet and opened the Royal Caribbean website, a new itinerary in the Caribbean, with a call to the company's private island. Found it. A 12-day ultra-luxe cruise, leaving in 3 weeks from Miami. The price for a cabin with a balcony is almost $7,000. Deluxe suites start at $15,000. I had money. Enough for a trip like this and more. Through careful investments and a modest lifestyle, I'd accumulated a decent sum. A tax inspector's pension isn't luxurious, but it's stable. Plus savings, plus a house almost paid off. But it wasn't about the money. It was about principle, arrogance, the betrayal. I closed the website and opened my email. The bank had sent confirmation of the limit setting and notifications. Now I had to wait for Veronica's next move. Waiting was something I knew how to do. 43 years of tracking down tax evaders had taught me patience. I continued my day as usual, watered the plants in the garden, went to the grocery store, talked to the neighbor across the fence about the impending storm. The phone never left my pocket. In the evening, as I was preparing a simple dinner, an omelet with cheese and tomatoes, a second notification came. Confirmation required, payment in the amount of $16,340, Royal Caribbean Cruises. So luxury apartments? I'm not surprised. I didn't respond to the notification. 2 minutes later, the phone rang. The bank, another clerk, a woman, asked if I was confirming the transaction. No, I replied. It's not my purchase. I understand, sir. We'll block the transaction and the card. Don't block the card, I said quickly. Just this particular transaction. Sir, according to protocol, I have no reason to believe that my card is compromised completely, I interrupted, using a professional tone. I suspect it's a family misunderstanding. There was a pause. All right, sir. The transaction has been declined, but the card is still active. We recommend that you change your online banking credentials. I will, I assured them, and hung up. The omelet burned. I turned off the stove and threw away the spoiled dinner. My appetite was gone. Instead of food, I poured myself a whiskey, a double shot, no ice, and returned to my office. Now I had to get confirmation. The inspector in me demanded irrefutable proof. I opened my laptop and went into the router settings. 2 years ago, I had installed an advanced home network with connection logging. Not for paranoid reasons, I just like systems that work properly and log everything that happens. In Saturday's connection log, I found what I was looking for. The Veronica iPhone device connected to my network at 1812 when they arrived. At 1923, about the time I dozed off, Veronica's phone accessed several web addresses. I'm no technical genius, but I recognize the domains. First my bank, then the cruise company. Later, at 21:30 Tuesday evening, the same device connected to my network. I was puzzled. Tuesday, Veronica wasn't in the house. Then I realized she had parked on the street close enough to catch my Wi-Fi signal. She already knew the password. I'd given it to Bryce to connect my laptop during visits. My suspicions were confirmed. While I was napping, Veronica took a picture of my credit card. Probably also looked in my wallet, where she kept a card with passwords to various services. Old-fashioned, yes, but with my memory it was necessary. She tapped into my bank, examined the balance, then checked the cost of the cruise. And last night, sitting in the car outside my house, she took the crucial step of trying to pay for the trip. I leaned back in my chair, rubbing the bridge of my nose. Fatigue was weighing down on me. Not physically, but mentally. The realization that my only son's wife was capable of such a thing hurt. Not for myself, for Bryce. What else was she doing behind his back? How deeply had her deception taken root in their marriage? The phone vibrated. A message from Bryce. Dad, are you home? Can I come over for about 15 minutes? That was unusual. Bryce rarely showed up spontaneously without Veronica around. I replied, sure, I'll be waiting. 20 minutes later, the driveway was illuminated by the headlights of his used Ford. He entered the house looking confused and worried. I offered him a drink, but he declined. "Nikki's upset," he said without preamble, sitting on the edge of the couch. "She tried to book a cruise for us as an anniversary surprise. Used our card, but it didn't have enough credit. And when she tried other payment options, it still didn't work." I watched my son closely. He avoided my gaze by rubbing a button on his sleeve, a gesture from childhood that showed up when he was embarrassed or lying. "What are the other options?" I asked calmly. "Well, he hesitated. "She wanted to use some of the money we're saving, but there's some verification problems there." I nodded, not giving away my thoughts. Bryce was lying, ineptly, reluctantly, but he was lying. So Veronica had told him that the problem was their own finances, not that she was trying to use my card. "So what do you plan to do?" I asked. "I don't know," he sighed. "This cruise means so much to her. She says it's a chance to finally relax, to strengthen our relationship. The last year has been stressful." I wonder why, I thought, but said aloud, 16,000 is a lot of money for a teacher and a travel agent. His head came up sharply. "How do you know the exact amount?" I shrugged, I assumed. "A luxury suite on Royal Caribbean is about that much. If Veronica was choosing, it was unlikely she'd settle for anything less luxurious." Bryce looked confused. "Yeah, you're right. She deserves the best, doesn't she? After everything she does for us." "And what exactly does she do?" I wanted to ask, but I held back. Instead, I said, "Son, have you come to ask for money?" A blush flooded his cheeks. He began to fumble with his button again. "No, not at all. I just, wanted to talk." "Bryce," I leaned forward. "If you need help, any kind of help, you can count on me." He nodded, looking down at the floor. "Thanks, Dad. But we'll get through this. I just wanted to..." "Advice. Nikki's going to be very disappointed. Perhaps something more in line with your budget?" I suggested gently. "Anniversaries are primarily about feelings, not money." Bryce let out a short, bitter laugh. "Try explaining that to Nikki." After my son left, I sat in silence for a long time, pondering the situation. Veronica clearly hadn't told Bryce about the attempt to use my card. Instead, she had created a story about problems with their own finances, perhaps hoping he would offer to ask me for money himself. Now I had to decide how to proceed. I could call Bryce, tell him the truth, show him the proof. But that would have destroyed his marriage, or at least dealt him a serious blow. Was I ready to take that kind of responsibility? I could have also ignored the situation, pretend I knew nothing and continue to watch Veronica manipulate my son. Or I could find a third way, a way that would show Veronica's true colors without my direct intervention. A solution that would allow Bryce to see the truth for himself. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a folder labeled Tax Records B&W. I'd helped them with their tax returns 2 years ago and kept copies, just in case. My experience as a tax preparer told me, always keep documents, especially if you suspect you might need them. I started going through the papers, making notes, methodically, carefully, as I'd done all my life. Veronica's expenses, inconsistencies in the reports, the odd write-offs I'd noticed back then, but had ignored for the sake of family peace. By midnight, the plan was ready. Not ideal, risky, but the best I could come up with. I closed the folder, put the notes away, and turned off the office light. My sister-in-law thought I was an old man out of my mind, a toothless, harmless relic of the past. She didn't understand one simple truth. Old wolves don't lose their grip. They just choose their battles wiser. I woke up earlier than usual. The sun was barely above the horizon, coloring the Fullerton sky a soft pink. Old age has its advantages. My years in the IRS had taught me to appreciate the morning when my brain works clearest. I brewed coffee and sat at the kitchen table with a notepad and pen. Bryce's visit yesterday had left an unpleasant residue. My son hadn't just avoided looking me in the eye, he'd actively participated in the deception, even if only indirectly. Veronica had gotten deeper into his mind than I had realized. The first thing I did was call the bank. A teller named Ava listened patiently to my request. Mr. Abbott, would you like us to temporarily block large transactions on your card, but not notify you of the reason for the block when you try to pay? That is correct, I confirmed. If someone tries to use the card to pay over $1,000, simply reject the transaction without explanation. We can impose such a restriction, but usually the customer is told the reason for the rejection. In this case, I prefer to keep the reason unknown. Very well, sir. The restriction will be in effect for 30 days. After that, you will have to renew it or remove it. That's enough, I said, knowing that the situation would be resolved one way or another by then. After the call, I opened my safe, small but secure, hidden behind a painting in my office. Inside were important documents, a will, an insurance policy, deeds to the house, and the folder I'd pulled out yesterday, tax records B&W. 2 years ago, while helping Veronica with her tax return, I'd noticed a few questionable items. Too high deductions for professional expenses, unclear origins of some income, suspicious transactions involving consulting services from companies I couldn't identify. Then I kept my mouth shut, for Bryce's sake, for the fragile peace of the family. But now everything was different. I took the folder, scanned the key documents, and saved them to a flash drive, then carefully edited the electronic copies, removing any mention of my name or direct involvement in the preparation of these declarations. I knew what I was doing. The IRS valued me for my attention to detail. The next step was to draft an anonymous letter to the IRS. I was careful to use general phrases. Please be advised of possible discrepancies in Veronica Abbott's, née Palmer, tax returns for the past 3 years. Of particular interest are the inflated professional expenses and unreported consulting income. The attached documents provide details. No emotion, no accusations. Just facts and suspicions that any conscientious tax inspector has a duty to verify. I knew what I was doing and understood the consequences. A tax audit is no joke. If my suspicions were correct, Veronica faced not only a fine but possible criminal prosecution for proven willful tax evasion. Was that too harsh a punishment for trying to steal from my card? Perhaps. But it wasn't just about the theft. It was the culmination of 5 years of manipulation, lies, and the gradual destruction of my son. I left the house, walked to the post office in downtown Fullerton, and sent the envelope with the flash drive by special delivery to the regional IRS office, anonymously but with all of Veronica's necessary details. On the way back, I stopped by the Morning Ray Cafe, a small establishment that served the best pancakes in town. Elizabeth loved this place. We used to come here often on Sundays when Bryce was little. "Good morning, Mr. Abbott," Jenny greeted me, an older waitress who had been working here for what seemed like forever. "The usual?" "Yes, please," I nodded, taking a seat at the corner table. The usual meant blueberry pancakes with maple syrup. Elizabeth always said that life was too short to deny yourself small pleasures. Today I needed that small pleasure to soften the bitterness of the decision I had made. As I waited to order, my phone vibrated. An incoming call from Veronica. I hesitated for a few seconds before answering. "Norman?" Her voice sounded strained. "Are you busy?" "Good morning, Veronica," I answered calmly. "I'm having breakfast at the Morning Ray. Is something wrong?" No, nothing much." She tried to keep her voice light, but she wasn't very successful. "I was just wondering if you were planning on stopping by the bank today." "Okay, here we go." I took a sip of coffee. "I wasn't planning on it. What's the matter?" "Well, I just thought, she's a little hesitant. Bryce mentioned that you had some questions about banking, and I'm on my way to the mall where your bank has a branch. I could give you a ride." Resourceful, clearly trying to find out if I know they're trying to use my card, and if so, if I intend to do something about it. "Hut, that's very nice of you," I said, "but my banking issues can only be handled by my account manager, Mr. Daniels, and he's not working today." "Oh, I see," she tried to hide her disappointment. "Maybe some other time. By the way, Bryce and I wanted to invite you to dinner this weekend. We have, news." "News? Interesting." Veronica hadn't given up on the cruise. Apparently now they were going to ask for the money directly. "I'd love to," I agreed. "Saturday? Great. Be there at 6 o'clock. We said goodbye, and I put the phone on the table thoughtfully. Jenny brought pancakes, but I didn't have an appetite. I forced myself to eat them anyway, an old habit of not leaving food on my plate. Back home, I spent the rest of the morning doing chores. Around noon came a notice from the bank. Rejected attempted payment in the amount of $16,340 to Royal Caribbean Cruises. Veronica made another attempt. 20 minutes later, she called again. Norman, I'm sorry to bother you. Her voice sounded anxious. Have you noticed any problems with your credit card lately? No, I answered, deliberately creating a pause. Should I have? No, of course not, she said quickly. It's just, Bryce's bank had some kind of system glitch today. I thought maybe it was a wider problem. As far as I know, there's nothing wrong with my card, I said. I used it to pay for breakfast this morning. I see, she was clearly nervous. Well, I guess it's just their bank. I'm sorry for the inconvenience. Don't be, I replied gently. Hopefully Bryce's problems would be resolved quickly. After that conversation, I could almost physically feel Veronica's panic. She was trying to figure out what was going on. The transaction was declined without explanation. My card works for small purchases, but not for a large amount. I show no sign of being aware of her actions. She was confused, and that was just the beginning. In the afternoon, I tackled the garden. Physical labor always helped me clear my head. I was trimming the hedge when I saw Bryce's car pull into the driveway. Alone, without Veronica. Hey, Dad, he looked worried. Need any help? I'm handling it. I put down the garden shears. Something wrong? Bryce shifted from foot to foot, hesitant to start a conversation. Nikki's upset, he said finally. This cruise. Anyway, we're having trouble paying for it. It's not working out. I'm sorry to hear that. I gave him a look of genuine sympathy. Technical difficulties? Not exactly. He was clearly uncomfortable. Look, Dad, I hate to ask this, but, could you lend us the money for this cruise? We'll pay it back, sure. Little by little. There it is. Veronica's plan B. $16,000 is a lot of money, I remarked. I know, Bryce stared at the ground. It's a lot, but it's so important to Nikki. Why? I asked bluntly. Why is it so important that you're willing to go into this kind of debt? He was silent for a few seconds. She deserves the best I can give her, he said quietly. She always has. I just want her to be happy. My heart squeezed. My son, who was always eager to please. First his mother, then me, now Veronica. Always seeking approval, always underestimating himself. Bryce, I put my hand on his shoulder. Have you ever thought that maybe real happiness isn't on expensive cruises? He shrugged his shoulders. It's important to Nikki. They've got everyone at the agency talking about this new itinerary. She'll be embarrassed if she can't go. Embarrassed? I raised an eyebrow. In front of who? Her co-workers. To herself. I don't know. He ran his hand through his hair. She works so hard for us. I sighed. I had to be careful not to push my son away. I'll think about your request, I said finally. But first I want to make sure it's really necessary. Come over for dinner on Saturday like you planned, and we'll discuss it together. Bryce looked both relieved and worried at the same time. Thanks, Dad. I'm sorry to put you in this position. After he left, I finished with the garden and went back inside. I found a message on my answering machine from a former colleague, Richard Morgan. We'd kept in touch since my retirement. Occasional phone calls, the occasional game of golf. Norman, it's Rich. Listen, it's a strange coincidence. A case of possible tax violations came across my desk, and the last name seemed familiar. Abbott, isn't that a relative of yours by any chance? Call me back. I didn't expect the case to go to anyone I knew. But then again, the IRS isn't that big of an organization in our area. I decided not to call Rich back right away. Let the process run its course without my interference. In the evening, I cooked a simple dinner and turned on the TV, a documentary about the underwater world. I watched it without paying attention. My thoughts were preoccupied with the upcoming Saturday meeting. How would Veronica react when I refused the money? What would Bryce say? How far are they willing to go? Around 9 p.m., the phone rang again. This time it was Veronica. Norman, sorry for the late call. Her voice sounded strange, tense with a hint of panic. I need to ask you something important. I'm listening. I turned off the TV. Did you? She hesitated. Have you contacted the IRS lately about me or Bryce? Here it is. The audit notice came sooner than I expected. The IRS was more efficient than when I was in the service. No, I answered calmly. What makes you think that? The letter came today. Her voice trembled. About the upcoming tax audit. My returns for the last 3 years. It's not pleasant, I said neutrally. But if your taxes are in order, there's nothing to worry about. Of course, everything's fine, she answered too quickly. It's just a weird coincidence. First the problems with the cruise payment, now this. Life is full of coincidences, I said philosophically. Have you talked to Bryce about this? Not yet, she admitted. I didn't want to worry him. You're not going to tell him, are you? Please, interesting. For the first time in years, Veronica was asking me for something instead of demanding or manipulating. I won't, I promised. That's between you and Bryce, but I suggest you be honest with him. Of course, she tried to return to her usual confident tone. I'll just pick the right moment. I don't want to ruin the weekend. After the conversation, I sat in the darkness of the living room thinking. The plan had worked even better than I'd expected. Veronica was in a panic. 2 blows at once. The failed attempt to use my card and the tax audit notice. She clearly suspected a connection, but couldn't be sure. I had complicated feelings. Satisfaction that the plan had worked. Bitterness at having to resort to such measures. Anxiety for Bryce, who would inevitably get hurt in this situation. But there was something else too. A strange sense of freedom. For the first time in a long time, I was acting. Not just reacting. I went up to the bedroom and pulled a picture of Elizabeth from the bedside table. She was looking at me with the easy smile I loved so much. A little ironic, with a sparkle in her eyes. You wouldn't approve, I said to the picture. You've always been kinder than me, but sometimes kindness is not the best counselor. I imagined Veronica sitting in her living room right now, panic rising. She's going over her options, maybe going over her tax returns, trying to figure out what exactly might have caught the attention of the IRS. Maybe thinking about how to hide the truth from Bryce. Her world was starting to fall apart, and I felt a grim satisfaction in that. The next morning, I woke up to a phone call. Bryce, 6:30 in the morning. Unusually early for him. Dad, sorry for the early call. His voice sounded worried. Hasonom, we're in trouble. Nikki got a tax audit notice yesterday. She was up all night going through the paperwork. She says it's some kind of mistake. The IRS rarely makes mistakes, son, I said, sitting up in bed. If they initiated an audit, there must be a reason. But this is so weird. Right now, when we're having trouble paying for the cruise, coincidence, I repeated the phrase I'd said to Veronica. Maybe, he didn't sound convinced. Look, about Saturday, Nikki says she needs to study for the test. Why don't we reschedule? Whatever suits you, I agreed easily. Tax matters do need attention. After the conversation, I made coffee and went out on the veranda. The morning was clear, cloudless. Somewhere in the distance a dog was barking, a typical Fullerton morning. The phone rang again. This time it was Rich Morgan. Norman, did you get my message? He asked without preamble. I did, but I didn't get a chance to call back. What happened? Didn't you mention that your sister-in-law, Veronica Palmer Abbott, works for Exclusive Travel? I may have mentioned it, I said evasively. What is it, Rich? We received an anonymous tip about possible irregularities in her tax returns. I took the case when I saw the last name. Thought maybe you knew about it. No, I tried to sound surprised. Is it serious? Based on the preliminary analysis, yes. Excessive business expenses, unrecorded income, schemes with fictitious consultations. If even half of it checks out, she could face a hefty fine, possibly even a criminal case. That's it, I paused. Well, the law is the law. Yes, but it could affect your son too, if they filed a joint declaration. I see, I said. Thanks for the warning, Rich. After that conversation, I sat on the veranda for a long time. The sun was rising higher and higher, and it was going to be a hot day. I imagined Veronica scrambling around the house, trying to find a way out, how her panic was growing, how she was beginning to realize that the ground was slipping from under her feet. I felt a prick of conscience, but quickly suppressed it. She chose this path on her own. First, she tried to steal from my card. Then she manipulated Bryce to get the money. And apparently, she'd been cheating the IRS for years. Payback was coming, and I had no regrets. 3 days passed in silence. Bryce didn't call, and neither did Veronica. I stayed out of it, letting events take their course. My part of the job was done. The tax machine was up and running. The cruise payment was blocked. Now all that was left to do was wait for the consequences. On Saturday around 5 p.m., as I was trimming the rose bushes in the garden, Bryce's car swerved into the driveway. He jumped out of it without turning off the engine and came toward me with wide strides. His face was contorted with anger, an expression I'd seen on him perhaps only in his teens. "It's you, isn't it?" he blurted out instead of greeting. "You're the one who ratted Nikki out to the IRS?" I straightened slowly, putting the garden shears aside. I hadn't expected the confrontation to happen so soon and so violently. "Hello, Bryce," I said calmly. "Why don't we go inside? Answer the question." He was almost shouting, which hadn't happened in years. "You filed a complaint with the IRS, right?" The neighbor across the street, Mrs. Greenwood, who was watering her flowers, turned around at the noise. I nodded, letting her know it was all right, and gestured for my son to come inside. "We'd better talk inside," I insisted. Bryce followed me, still seething with rage. In the living room, I motioned for him to sit down, but he remained standing with his arms crossed over his chest. "I'm waiting for an answer," he said, quieter but still with obvious hostility. "What makes you think it's me?" I asked, sinking into my chair. My old knees no longer allowed me to stand for long periods of time in tense situations. "Because it's too much of a coincidence." Bryce started pacing around the room. First the problems with paying for the cruise, then the tax audit. And Nikki's friend at the IRS says the complaint was anonymous, but drafted professionally, as if by an insider. Who else could have done it but you, a former tax inspector? I was silent, pondering my answer. I hadn't expected Veronica to have acquaintances in the tax office. But it made sense. People like her always make useful connections. "Sit down, please," I said at last. "You'll never know the truth if you yell." To my surprise, Bryce obeyed. He sank heavily onto the couch, suddenly looking exhausted. "Veronica's hysterical," he said quietly. "She says you're the one trying to ruin our marriage, that you've always hated her." "I don't hate Veronica," I replied, choosing my words carefully. "But I have reasons not to trust her." "What kind of reasons?" he snorted. "The fact that she tried to book us a cruise? Is it a crime to want to give us a gift? And how did she plan to pay for this gift?" I asked bluntly. Bryce looked away. "She had money set aside. Commissions from the job. $16,340, I clarified. "That's how much the deluxe suites on this cruise cost, right?" His eyes widened. "How do you know the exact amount?" Moment of truth. I could lie, say I found the information on the cruise company's website, or I could have told the truth. I chose the latter. "Because your wife tried to pay for the cruise with my credit card," I said flatly. "Twice. The bank notified me of the attempted transactions." Bryce's face froze. He stared at me, unblinking, as if he didn't understand what he was hearing. "It's impossible," he whispered finally. "Nikki would never." "She took a picture of my card when I dozed off after dinner last Saturday night," I continued, "then used the data to try to make a payment. When it failed, she tried again, then sent you to ask for the money." "No," he shook his head. "You're wrong. This is some kind of misunderstanding." I stood up, walked to my desk, and pulled out the bank printouts I'd prepared in advance. I handed them to Bryce. "Here are the notices of attempted transactions. Here's an extract from the home network log showing that Veronica's phone was connecting to my Wi-Fi not only during your visit, but also later, when she was sitting in the car outside. Here's the transcript of my conversation with the bank, where I asked for large transactions to be blocked, but no notification of the reason for the denial." Bryce slowly looked through the documents. His hands were trembling slightly. He looked like a man who had just been informed of a terminal diagnosis. "You could have forged this," he said weakly, but there was no longer conviction in his voice. "Why?" I sat back in my chair. "What would be the point of me lying?" "To ruin our marriage." He raised his voice again, but it wasn't rage. It was desperation. "You always thought I made a mistake marrying her." "I never said that. I said calmly. But I did. He threw the papers on the coffee table. I've seen the way you look at her, how you avoid being alone with her, how you criticize her choices, her decisions. I sighed. Maybe he was right. I never hid my doubts well enough. Bryce, I said softly, think to yourself, if I wanted to destroy your marriage, wouldn't I have done it sooner? There were plenty of opportunities in 5 years. He was silent, staring at the floor. Now answer my question, I continued. Do you really believe that your wife has never done anything questionable with her finances? That all those expensive things, traveling, restaurants, were all paid for with honestly earned money? He looked up at me with a look of struggle in his eyes. She works hard. She gets good commissions from rich clients. Good enough for a lifestyle that's several times the income of a school teacher and a travel agent. Bryce ran his hand through his hair, a gesture he'd adopted from me. He always did that when he was confused. I don't know, he finally admitted. I didn't get into the details. Nikki was handling the finances, said I didn't have the aptitude for it, and I believed it. My heart sank. Classic manipulative tactic, convince the victim of his own incompetence to gain total control. What about the tax audit? I asked, changing the subject. What exactly did they find? Bryce looked at the papers again, as if hoping to find an answer in them. I don't know exactly. Nikki wouldn't show me the paperwork. Said it was a misunderstanding, that she could handle it on her own. And you didn't insist on finding out the details? It's about your joint taxes, Bryce. If there are penalties, you'll both have to pay. He shook his head. We file separate returns. Nikki insisted on it from the beginning. Said it was easier because of her business expenses. It was interesting. Separate returns could protect Bryce from direct liability for Veronica's machinations, but also indicated that she'd originally planned financial schemes he shouldn't have known about. I didn't file a complaint with the IRS, I finally said. Technically, that was true. I hadn't filed a formal complaint, just anonymously passed on the information. But I'm not surprised someone did. Veronica isn't the most careful person. Maybe she hurt someone's interests, or just attracted attention with her lifestyle. Bryce looked at me carefully, trying to determine if I was telling the truth. I held his gaze. In my years at the IRS, I've learned to hide my thoughts when necessary. I don't know what to believe, he said finally. Nikki says one thing, you say another. These documents, they could mean anything. Then check it out for yourself, I suggested. Call the bank. Ask about any attempted transactions on my card. Check Veronica's tax returns for the last few years. Ask her direct questions and watch her reaction. He lowered his gaze to the papers again. And if you're right, if she really is, what should I do then? There was such desperation in his voice that I couldn't help but go over and hug him like I'd done when I was a kid. But we'd outgrown such displays of affection long ago. It's up to you, I said. I can only advise, don't jump to conclusions, neither one way nor the other. Gather the facts. Think about it. And remember, no matter what happens, I'm on your side. Bryce nodded, stood up, and headed for the door. At the threshold, he stopped. She said you had reasons to get back at her, that you fought over the money my grandmother left me. I raised my eyebrows in surprise. What money? Your grandmother left you her stamp collection and her cookbooks. The only thing of value she had was a house in Pasadena, and it was sold while she was still alive to pay for a nursing home. Bryce looked confused. But Nikki said, she said that you hid part of the inheritance, that legally half of it was supposed to go to me, but you took it all for yourself. I shook my head, feeling the anger growing inside. Not at my son at Veronica, at that brazen lie. It's completely untrue. I could show you my mother's will, the court documents about the distribution of property. Everything was transparent. He nodded without looking at me. I need to think about all this. After he left, I sat in the chair for a long time thinking. The plan was working, but the price was high. Bryce looked broken. I had hurt him, albeit with the intention of protecting him from more pain in the future. Had I been right, or had I selfishly interfered in his life with my own ideas of justice? That evening, Rich Morgan called. Norman, I shouldn't have to tell you this, he began without preamble, but your sister-in-law's case is more serious than it first appeared. We found large sums of money being transferred to offshore accounts, And it's not just her money. It looks like she's been using travel company clients' funds. What? I was genuinely shocked. I was expecting tax fraud, but not outright theft. Yeah, it's a pretty simple but effective scheme. Clients paid for luxury tours. She spent part of the payment through her personal accounts, then diverted it offshore. Covered the difference with the next payment. Classic Ponzi scheme. It held up for a few years, but now it's all falling apart. The travel company's already doing an internal investigation. I squeezed the receiver of the phone. This was worse than I had anticipated. Much worse. Does Bryce know? I doubt it, Rich answered. Judging by the paperwork, she'd been careful to hide everything from her husband. Separate accounts, separate tax returns. He doesn't appear in our files as an accessory, though, of course, there will be questions for him. After the conversation, I poured myself a whiskey and went out onto the veranda. The night was warm and starry. Somewhere in the distance, music was playing. Probably the neighbors 2 houses down were having a party. I thought about Bryce, about his confusion, his pain, his mistrust. He loved Veronica. In his own way, the dependent, almost painful love of a man unsure of his own worth. What would happen to him when the whole truth came out? When he finds out that his wife wasn't just trying to use her father-in-law's card, but was stealing from customers? My revenge, intended as just retribution for the attempted theft, turned into something more. I had unwittingly ripped the lid off Pandora's box. And now we all had to deal with the consequences. The next morning, while I was eating breakfast, the phone rang. "Bryce, could I come over?" he asked briefly. "I need to talk." "Sure," I agreed. "When?" "I'm already at your house." He looked even worse than yesterday. His eyes were red, his face gaunt, his clothes wrinkled. He'd obviously been up all night. "What happened?" I asked, even though I already knew. "Saint-Tibon." "You were right," he said, walking into the living room and sinking heavily onto the couch. "About everything." I checked. I waited in silence for him to continue. "I called the bank first," he said in a monotone, as if he were reading a report. "They confirmed the attempted transactions on your card. Then I found her cell phone while she was taking a shower. There were pictures of your credit card and screenshots of the cruise site." He paused, swallowed. "Oh." "And then I found a folder on her computer. Hidden, password protected. But the password was simple, my date of birth. Inside were documents, dozens of documents, bank statements, invoices, money transfer instructions, client names, amounts, dates." "She's been stealing clients' money," I said quietly. Bryce looked up sharply. "You knew?" "I just found out yesterday. A former colleague of mine at the IRS told me." He nodded as if that confirmed his worst fears. When I asked her about it, she denied it. Said it was part of the job, that everyone in the travel business did it, that I didn't understand how the real world worked. The typical defensive reaction of a scammer is to normalize their actions, to convince them that everyone does it. "And then she said she was doing it for us," Bryce continued. "So I could be proud of her. So we could live our lives with dignity, as if our ordinary lives weren't good enough." He covered his face with his hands. How could I have been so blind? 5 years, Dad. 5 years I didn't notice I was living with a thief. I walked over, sat down next to him on the couch. I put my hand gently on his shoulder. "You saw what you wanted to see. We all do it." "You don't," he shook his head. "You always saw right through it, and tried to warn me, didn't you? All these years, your hints, your questions, and I ignored. I didn't deny it. It was the truth. What are you going to do?" Bryce straightened up, wiped his eyes. "I don't know. The tax audit is in full swing. Her travel agency's launched an internal investigation. She could be investigated. She could even go to jail." He sounded emotionless, like he was talking about a stranger. "Will you stay with her?" I asked bluntly. My son looked at me for a long moment. There was pain, disappointment, fatigue, but also something else, a determination I hadn't seen in a long time. "No," he said firmly. "I can't. This isn't just about money or deception. She tried to turn me against you, lied about my grandmother's inheritance, used me as a cover for her schemes. That's not love. It's manipulation." I felt both relieved and heavy at the same time. Relief that Bryce had finally seen the light, heavy with the realization of what he'd have to go through. I have a lot of things to work out, he continued. Find a lawyer, file for divorce, figure out how involved I am in all of this legally. I don't even know where to start. I'll help, I said simply. Whatever I can. He nodded, staring into the space in front of him. You know what the weirdest thing is? Part of me still loves her, even after all of this, even knowing who she really is. It hurts, Dad. It hurts so damn bad. I didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. Love is a complex, irrational force. It doesn't disappear at the snap of a finger, even when it should. Can I stay here for a few days, Bryce asked. I don't want to go home. Not right now. Of course, I agreed. Your room is always waiting for you. He smiled weakly. Thank you. I'm sorry I yelled at you yesterday. For accusing you. It's okay, I squeezed his shoulder. You were in shock. It's understandable. Bryce left to go upstairs to his old room. I was left sitting on the couch thinking about what had happened. My revenge had worked even better than I'd planned, but there was no joy, only bitterness and regret at having to resort to such measures. And yet I couldn't help but think I'd done the right thing. Cruel, yes. Calculating, certainly. But the right thing. Bryce finally saw Veronica's true colors, and though it was a hard road ahead of him, it was a road to freedom. I walked out into the garden to the rose bushes I hadn't had time to trim yesterday. The sun was shining brightly, but I felt an inner chill. The conflict between my desire to protect my son and my desire for justice had not been resolved. Yes, I had protected Bryce from further manipulation by Veronica, but at what cost? And was I really better than her, using my own manipulation techniques to accomplish the goal? I didn't know the answer to that, and I probably never would know. Bryce stayed at my house for 3 days, quiet days filled with heavy silence. He hardly ever left his room except to eat, and even then we barely exchanged a few phrases. I didn't push. I knew he needed time to think about what had happened, to make decisions. Veronica called endlessly, first to him, then to me when he stopped answering. I ignored her calls too. What could I say to her? I'm sorry I exposed your machinations. Sorry you turned out to be a thief. I didn't like platitudes, and she didn't want to hear the truth. On the 4th day, early Tuesday morning, she showed up on my doorstep. I was just making coffee when the doorbell rang. A long, insistent ring. Standing on the porch was Veronica, impeccably dressed, as always, but with visible signs of insomnia on her face. Expensive beige suit, high-heeled shoes, hair gathered into a tight bundle. She looked like someone going to an important business meeting, or a war. I know he's here, she said instead of greeting. I need to talk to my husband. I didn't move away from the door. Bryce doesn't want to talk right now. That's not for you to decide, her eyes narrowed. You ruined my life. At least have the courage to say it to my face. I didn't ruin anyone's life, Veronica, I replied calmly. You created this situation yourself. Hypocrite, she almost spit the word out. You've been trying to turn Bryce against me for years, and now you've taken the first opportunity to strike. And for what? Over some stupid attempt to book a cruise? This isn't about the cruise. I shook my head. This is about you trying to use my card without authorization. It's about you lying to Bryce about me, about the inheritance, the fact that you've been manipulating him for years, and if the tax audit is to be believed, stealing clients' money. Her face contorted for a moment, but she quickly regained control. The IRS won't prove anything. It's standard practice in the travel business. Temporary movements of funds to streamline processes. My lawyer will explain everything. Your lawyer might explain it, I said. But will you explain it to Bryce? He saw the documents on your computer. She turned pale. He was going through my files. He was looking for the truth, and he found it. At that moment, footsteps sounded behind me. Bryce came down the stairs, attracted by the voices. He stopped a few steps from the door, looking at his wife with an expression I couldn't read, a mixture of hurt, anger, and a strange determination. Nikki, he said quietly. Bryce. She changed immediately. Her voice became softer, her shoulders slumped, her whole being radiated vulnerability. Finally, I've been so worried. You didn't answer your cell phone. You didn't come home. I know what you did, he interrupted her. Everything. Dad's card, the client money, about lying about the inheritance. She froze, then gave me a searing look. And you believed him? Your father, who always hated me? Who would do anything to destroy our marriage? I saw the proof, Nikki. Bryce spoke with the weary calm of someone who'd been through an emotional storm and found himself on the other side. Not his words, the facts, documents, your own files. I quietly stepped aside, giving them space to talk. It was their battle, not mine. But I stayed close enough to intervene if things got out of hand. Veronica paused, assessing the situation. Then her tactics changed. Okay, she said, entering the house uninvited. Let's talk, but in private, without your father. Bryce shook his head. Anything you want to say, you can say here. We don't have secrets anymore. Veronica glanced around the living room, then sank to the edge of the couch, maintaining perfect posture. Her whole posture spoke of control over herself, over the situation, over the impression she wanted to make. You don't understand how the world works, Bryce, she began calmly. I never have. All those rules, laws, regulations, they're for regular people, for the gray masses. People like your father, she gave me a scornful look. Those who spend their lives satisfied with crumbs, afraid to go beyond the boundaries of what's allowed. And you're special? Bryce asked, remaining standing. Above the law? No, just smarter. She crossed her legs, adjusting the cuff on her sleeve. I see opportunities where others see obstacles. And yes, sometimes that requires a creative approach to the rules. Creativity? Bryce grinned bitterly. Is that what they call stealing now? I didn't steal from anyone. For the first time, there was emotion in her voice. Everyone got what they paid for. The tours, the hotels, the experiences. And the fact that some of the money temporarily moved through my accounts is just good stewardship. And my father's card? Is that efficient resource management too? She hesitated for a moment. It was a mistake, I admit. I shouldn't have tried to use his card without authorization. But I was acting in good faith. I wanted to surprise you, to give you a memorable vacation for our anniversary. At someone else's expense, Bryce said. Your father is literally swimming in money, she exclaimed, straightening up. You're his only son. He could give you a gift like this if he wasn't so stingy and controlling. I just sped up the process. I wanted to object. I wasn't swimming in any money. I just lived modestly and managed my pension wisely. But I didn't. That was their conversation. So were you planning on paying the money back? Bryce asked. She hesitated too long before answering. Of course. Eventually. How? He crossed his arms over his chest. From the money you were temporarily moving from clients? Her face twitched. You don't understand how it works. The travel business is a complex system. Money is constantly moving, flowing from one account to another. It's like a river. The important thing is that everyone gets what they want at the end. And those clients who had to cancel their tours due to unforeseen circumstances? Bryce pulled a piece of paper out of his pocket. I found the letters. The Henderson family who couldn't fly to Europe because of booking problems. A retirement club whose cruise was canceled at the last minute. Is that part of your complex system too? Veronica pressed her lips together. Things get screwed up in any business. But I always offered compensation, alternatives. After I used their money for my own needs, Bryce finished. She looked at him challengingly. Who do you think has been paying our bills all these years? Your teacher's salary? She let out a short laugh. You have no idea how much our lives cost. The house, the cars, the restaurants, the clothes, the vacation to France last summer. Do you think we could afford it, honestly? I never asked for a luxurious life, Bryce said quietly. Simple happiness was enough for me. Our happiness? Oh, please. She rolled her eyes. Don't play the saint. You've enjoyed every bit of it. The new suit for the private school interview, the vacation you've always dreamed of, the restaurant for our first anniversary. You never asked where the money came from. You were comfortable not knowing. Bryce remained silent. There was some truth in what she said, and we both realized it. He did turn a blind eye to the discrepancy between their lifestyle and income. Maybe subconsciously he guessed, but he preferred not to think about it. You know what the funny thing is? Veronica continued, seeing his confusion. I did it for us. For you. I wanted you to be proud of me. I wanted us to live the life you deserve, so that your father, she gave me a scornful look, would finally see that I was worthy of being your wife. Worthy? Bryce shook his head. You lied to me, manipulated me, used me. That's not love, Nikki. What do you think love is? She stood up, walked over to him, put her hand on his shoulder. Sitting in a small apartment, counting cents to a paycheck? Deny yourself everything because of some abstract moral principles? I gave you a better life. At the cost of deceit, he gently removed her hand from his shoulder. Everyone lies, Bryce. She lowered her voice to an intimate whisper. Your father is no exception. Do you think he's always been crystal clear about his work? Never turned a blind eye to the misconduct of powerful people? Never used his position of power? I tensed up. This conversation was taking an unpleasant turn. I'd expected this tactic, though, attempting to divert attention, to smear her opponent, to create a moral relativism that made her own crimes seem less significant. This has nothing to do with us, Bryce said firmly. What's going on between us right now? It does, she raised her voice. He started all of this. Veronica pointed at me with an accusing gesture. He never accepted me, always looked down on me, didn't think I was good enough for his precious son, and now that he'd found an opportunity, he'd struck. Filed an anonymous complaint with the IRS, blocked my card without explanation to make me look stupid and suspicious. All of this is his plan to ruin our marriage. Bryce looked at her calmly, with a slight sadness. And you yourself? Have you done nothing to undermine our marriage? Lying, manipulating, stealing. Is that part of my father's plan too? Veronica opened her mouth but said nothing. For the first time in the entire conversation, she looked genuinely confused, caught off guard. You don't understand, she said at last. I was in a difficult situation. Started out small commissions on the side, then a little more. The system worked. No one got hurt. But then I needed more money and more. It snowballed. I wanted to stop, honestly. I planned to give it all back as soon as things got better. And they were never going to get better, were they? Bryce asked. There would always be not enough. Always needed a little more. She lowered her gaze. You don't know what it's like to grow up with nothing. My family barely made ends meet. I swore to myself I would never live like that. I would never worry about money. It was a new tactic to elicit sympathy, to portray myself as a victim of circumstance. I watched Bryce's reaction. He'd always been soft-hearted, easy to manipulate emotionally, but now there was a new hardness in his eyes. We could have done this together, Nikki, he said quietly. Honestly, little by little. If you'd trusted me instead of lying. You don't understand, she shook her head. You've never understood how the real world works. You live in your books, in your ideals. I was trying to protect you from the harsh truth. What truth? That no one cares about the rules, she raised her voice. That the only way to succeed is to play by your own rules. That decency is a luxury only the rich can afford. Like your father, she glared at me again. I'm not rich, I said calmly. I just lived within my means and worked honestly. Oh, please, she snorted. 43 years in the tax office and never once took advantage of the position? Did not accept a thank you from the auditee? Did not turn a blind eye to the violations of a friend or an influential person? I wouldn't believe it. I shrugged my shoulders. Believe what you want to believe. But not everyone is like you, Veronica. Of course they are, she grinned bitterly. You're a saint, the perfect father, the perfect tax inspector. Only for some reason your son chose to live with me instead of beside you. Maybe because I gave him what you never could. Acceptance, support, faith in his abilities. Manipulation, I added quietly. Control. That's enough, Bryce interrupted us. This isn't a competition between you two. And it's not about the past, it's about the present. It's about what happened. Your actions, Nikki. She turned to him, suddenly changing tactics. Her eyes filled with tears, her voice trembled. I made a mistake, she said. Several mistakes. I admit it. But isn't that what marriage is all about? Forgiveness? Supporting each other in times of need? You didn't make mistakes, Nikki. He shook his head. You knowingly lied and stole. For years. It's not a mistake, it's a choice. A lifestyle. I can change. She stepped closer, took his hands in hers. For you. For us. We can start over. I'll get an honest job. Live modestly. Just don't leave me, Bryce. Not when I need your support so badly. I saw my son hesitate. Part of him, I knew, still loved that woman. Despite everything she'd done, despite the years of lies and manipulation. Love doesn't disappear overnight, even when it should. The IRS and the police are already investigating, he finally said, gently releasing his hands. You're facing serious fraud charges. I can't stop it. And I won't lie for you. Her face changed, her tears drying instantly. So you chose a side, she said coldly. His side, as you always do. I chose the truth, Bryce corrected. For the first time in a long time. Veronica straightened, squared her shoulders. The mask of vulnerability was gone, giving way to cold fury. You're going to regret this, she said quietly. Both of you will. You think I haven't prepared? I have information on every client, every deal. If I go down, I'll take them all with me. Threats won't help, I said. They're not threats, she turned to me. They're facts. I'm not the woman to mess with, Mr. Abbott. You've started a war you can't win. Bryce shook his head. This isn't a war, Nikki. It's the consequences of your own actions, and you're going to have to live with them. She stared at him for a long moment, like she was seeing him for the first time. Then she looked back at me. Congratulations, she said with a bitter chuckle. You got what you wanted. You got your son back. Ruined my life. Enjoy the victory while you can. With those words, she turned and headed for the door. She stopped on the threshold, turned around. I loved you, Bryce, she said softly, in my own way. But apparently that wasn't enough. The door slammed shut. Bryce and I remained standing in the living room, plunged into a heavy silence. Through the window, I watched Veronica get into her car, make a sharp turn, and drive away. She really going to cause trouble? Bryce asked after a long pause. Maybe, I admitted, but I don't think it would make a difference. The evidence against her is too strong. He nodded, staring into the space in front of him. You know, part of me still wants to believe her, he said quietly. That she really loved me. That she did everything for us. Not because of her own greed or vanity. People are complicated, I replied. There's rarely only black or only white. Maybe she did love you in her own way. But that doesn't justify what she did. Bryce ran his hand through his hair, a gesture he'd adopted from me as a child. I feel like such a fool, he admitted. 5 years of living with someone I didn't even know. You saw what you wanted to see, I said softly. We all do, especially when we love. He nodded, then looked at me with a new expression, a mixture of gratitude and concern. Thanks for revealing the truth, Dad. Even if the methods were questionable. I didn't say anything. The methods were indeed questionable. I was manipulating the situation, pulling strings like a puppeteer. How was I better than Veronica? By acting out of good intentions? But hell, as they say, is paved with them. What now? Bryce asked, breaking my train of thought. Now you have to decide what to do, I answered. With the marriage, with the investigation, with your life. What about you? What are you going to do? I shrugged my shoulders. The same thing I've always done. Live my life and help you if you ask. Bryce nodded, then suddenly stepped forward and hugged me. Tighter than he hadn't hugged me since I was a kid. I froze for a moment, then hugged him back, feeling something tighten in my chest. We'll get through this, he said quietly. Somehow. And in that moment, holding my son in my arms, I thought for the first time that maybe this whole revenge thing wasn't just about justice or retribution. Maybe it was about restoring the connection I had almost lost, about bringing back a son who had been so close, yet so far away all these years. I didn't know if I had done the right thing. I didn't know what the future would bring. But in that moment, in the quiet of the living room, with my son returned to me, albeit at such a cost, I felt a strange peace. The storm was just beginning. There were lawsuits, financial problems, emotional turmoil ahead. But now in this brief moment of peace, I allowed myself to believe that everything would be okay. that we would get through this, somehow. It had been 3 weeks since Veronica had left my house, hurling threats and promises of revenge. 3 weeks filled with legal advice, phone calls, and quiet evenings where Bryce and I sat in the living room, each immersed in our own thoughts. Bryce decided to file for divorce almost immediately. He hired an attorney, a young woman with a tenacious eye, and a reputation as a bulldog in divorce proceedings. I didn't interfere with his choice, only silently paid the first installment for his services. He tried to refuse, but I insisted. In the end, it was my actions that precipitated the denouement. Ms. Courtney says the case is going to be complicated, Bryce said one evening as we ate dinner on the veranda. The September air was still warm, but it already felt like fall was approaching. Because of the investigation into Nikki's financial machinations and possible criminal charges? I nodded, plating myself another batch of roast. Cooking always calmed me down, especially during hard times. It's to be expected. Your finances are tightly intertwined, even if you filed separate tax returns. She wants half the house, Bryce continued, looking down at his plate, and the bills, and part of my pension. Says she's earned it in 5 years of marriage. What does your lawyer say? That Nikki's unlikely to get everything she's asking for, especially under the circumstances. But it's going to be a long and unpleasant process, he sighed. She knows what buttons to push to hurt me. She always has. I didn't say anything. What could I say? I warned you. It's better in the long run? Platitudes wouldn't help, and the truth was too brutal. The days were adding up to a routine. Bryce resumed his schoolwork, though he said it wasn't easy. Rumors of Veronica's financial shenanigans had seeped into the small Fullerton community. He felt the stares of his colleagues, heard the whispers behind him. But he continued to teach history, finding some solace in it. I gardened, cooked meals, and occasionally met with Rich Morgan to check on the progress of the investigation. The news was disappointing for Veronica. The IRS had found numerous irregularities, and an audit of the travel agency had revealed systematic embezzlement of client money. She faced not only a large fine, but also imprisonment. She offered a deal with the investigation, Rich told me during our meeting at the Morning Ray Cafe. She's willing to testify against the agency in exchange for a reduced sentence. And what are the prosecutors saying? They're considering it, but given the scale of the fraud, it's unlikely she'll get probation. I slowly stirred the sugar in my coffee, thinking about the strangeness of the situation. A month ago, Veronica had seemed unapproachable, perfect in her designer suit, with impeccable hair and a cold smile. Now she was haggling with the DA's office, trying to avoid jail time. You know, Rich, I said thoughtfully, when I made that anonymous tip, I didn't realize it would go this far. Rich raised his eyebrows in surprise. So it was you, I suspected, but I wasn't sure. I nodded, feeling oddly relieved at the admission. She tried to use my credit card to pay for an expensive cruise. Without my knowledge, I just wanted to teach her a lesson, I guess. Well, it was a harsh lesson. Rich sipped his coffee. But you know she would have gotten caught sooner or later. These schemes don't work forever. You just hasten the inevitable. Maybe he was right. But it didn't lessen the heaviness in my chest when I saw Bryce's haggard face, when I heard him on the phone with his lawyer, when I caught him looking at old pictures of Veronica. One evening, about a month after the whole affair began, Bryce came home unusually enthusiastic. He walked into the kitchen where I was making dinner and sat down at the table with the expression of a man who had made an important decision. I'm leaving, Dad, he said without preamble. I froze with the knife in my hand. Where? Portland. Got a job offer at a private school there. Better conditions, better pay, and a fresh start, he smiled weakly. I need this. To get away from here. From all these memories, rumors, looks. I slowly put the knife down, wiped my hands with a towel. The news was unexpected, but upon reflection, logical. Of course, Bryce wanted a fresh start. Who wouldn't want to if they were him? When? I asked, sitting down across from him. In 2 weeks. Miss Courtney says my presence isn't required to continue the divorce proceedings. She will represent my interests, and I'm expected back in Portland for the start of the new semester. I nodded, trying to hide my mixed feelings. On the one hand, I was happy for my son. It was a step forward to a new life. On the other, I selfishly wanted him to stick around, especially now that we were finally starting to rebuild our relationship. I think it's a good decision, I finally said. New place, new people, a chance to start over. I'm glad you understand. Bryce looked relieved, as if he'd been expecting an objection. I've already found an apartment there. It's small, but it's in a good neighborhood, close to the school. We discussed the details of his move. I offered financial help. He reluctantly agreed to take some of it. As a loan dad, not a gift, we agreed that I would help him pack his belongings and ship them by a moving company. Everything was practical, logical, rational, but underneath that rationality was an emotional storm. My son was leaving, not because of jobs or opportunities. He was fleeing from the consequences of my actions, from the chaos I had helped create. The day Bryce left, I drove him to the airport. We barely spoke on the way, both of us realizing that all the important words had already been said. At the terminal, he turned to me, shuffling awkwardly from foot to foot. "Here we go," he said, looking at the arrivals and departures board. "A new chapter." "A new chapter," I repeated. "You deserve it, Bryce." He nodded, then suddenly hugged me, tightly like the day Veronica had come accusing me. I hugged him back, feeling something clench in my chest. "Thank you for helping me see the truth," he said quietly, "even if I wasn't ready for it." "The truth is always better than a lie," I replied, not quite sure I believed those words at the moment, even when it hurt. We pulled away from each other. Bryce picked up his suitcase. "I'll call you when I get there," he promised. "I'll be waiting." I watched him walk through the glass doors of the terminal, tall, a little slouchy, with his suitcase rolling behind him, like an obedient dog. My son, heading toward the new life I helped him find by destroying the old one. Back home, I poured myself a whiskey and stepped out onto the veranda. The sun was setting, coloring the Fullerton sky orange and pink. The house seemed empty, too quiet without Bryce's presence. The phone vibrated in his pocket. The number was undialed. Dash, dash. "Hello?" I answered, expecting another telemarketer. "Enjoying your victory, Mr. Abbott?" Veronica's voice sounded muffled but recognizable. I straightened in my chair. "Veronica, I didn't expect to hear from you." "Of course you didn't," she let out a short laugh. "You thought I was already in prison, didn't you? Or broken and destroyed?" "I didn't wish you harm," I said, realizing how fake that sounded. "Liar," she cut me off. "You knew what you were doing, knew what the consequences would be, and you did it anyway." I remained silent, seeing no point in denying the obvious. "You know what the funny thing is?" she continued after a pause. "You didn't win. Yes, you ruined my marriage, my career, maybe even my freedom, but Bryce still walked away. From both of us. He's starting a new life," I objected, "without the lies and manipulation." "Oh, please," she snorted. "Don't play the saint. You were as manipulative as I was. You just used different methods. And you got the same result. Loneliness." Her words struck a nerve because they contained some truth. I did manipulate the situation, and I really was alone. "Why are you calling, Veronica?" I asked, changing the subject. "I wanted you to know." Her voice turned icy. "I made a deal with the prosecutor's office. I'll testify against the agency's management. I'll get the minimum sentence, maybe even probation. And when this is over, I'll start over. Like Bryce. Like you." "Good for you," I said sincerely. Despite everything, I didn't want her to rot in jail. "Don't get too excited," her tone changed. "I'll never forget what you did, and I'll never forgive. One day, when you least expect it, I'll pay you back. With interest. Is that a threat?" "No, Mr. Abbott, it's a promise." The connection went dead. I sat staring at the phone's extinguished screen, feeling strangely numb. Should I have been afraid? Take her threats seriously? Or was this just the last lunge of a wounded beast? I finished my whiskey, watching the last rays of the sun disappear over the horizon. The garden seemed different in the twilight. The shadows lengthened. The colors faded. The familiar shapes became alien. Bryce called late that night, as promised. A brief conversation. His flight was fine. The apartment was better than in the photos. His new co-workers seemed like nice people. "Everything's good." "Everything's great. Have you talked to Nikki?" he asked suddenly after a pause. "She called today," I admitted. She cut a deal with the DA's office. Probably going to get probation. Bryce was quiet for a moment. That's, good, I guess. I don't want to hurt her, no matter what. I know, I said softly. You've never been vindictive. Unlike you. There was a slight tension in his voice. Unlike me, I agreed. There was no point in pretending. After the conversation, I sat in the darkened living room for a long time, thinking. Revenge had been accomplished. The plan had worked even better than I'd expected. Veronica had been exposed, Bryce freed from her manipulations. I should have felt satisfaction, triumph, but instead I felt only emptiness and vague unease. My son was gone, perhaps forever. Our relationship, though restored on the surface, remained complicated, with unspoken grievances and mistrust. Veronica, despite her defeat, maintained her toughness and determination, promising revenge. And I, having achieved justice, was left alone in a quiet house with the ghosts of the past and the uncertainty of the future. Was this victory worth it? Had I paid too high a price? Had I, in trying to protect my son from a manipulator, become the same manipulator, only with different methods and goals? I didn't know the answers to these questions, and perhaps I never would. The following weeks turned into a new routine. Bryce's calls became less frequent, shorter. He was busy settling into a new life, new acquaintances, a new job. I told myself that this was normal, that it should be, that I should be happy for his independence, his ability to move on. But deep down, I missed him. Our quiet evenings, our conversations about books and history, even his awkward attempts to reconcile me with Veronica. The presence of a loved one in the house. I never heard from Veronica again, but I sometimes caught myself checking the locks twice before I went to bed, checking the car more carefully before I drove, looking around on the street as if I expected to see her watching. The rational part of me said it was paranoia, that she'd likely forget her threats when she really started a new life. But my subconscious wouldn't listen to reason. 3 months later, I received official notice that the divorce proceedings were finalized. Bryce and Veronica were no longer husband and wife. Property had been divided, financial matters settled. The end of a story that never should have started. I called Bryce to break the news, even though I was sure he already knew. Yes, Miss Courtney called me this morning, he confirmed. It's over. How are you feeling? Strange, he admitted after a pause. Empty, but free, I guess. Like he'd dropped the heavy backpack he'd been carrying for years. It'll pass, I said, not sure if I was giving good advice. It'll get easier with time. I guess, he didn't sound convinced. You know, I sometimes wonder, what would have happened if you hadn't intervened? If things had gone on as they were? I hesitated, searching for words. Veronica would have gotten caught sooner or later, I said at last, echoing Rich Morgan's words. Schemes like this don't work forever. The only question is how much more pain and disappointment you'd have experienced by then. Maybe, he sighed, or maybe she would have changed. People change sometimes, you know. Rarely, I countered, and usually only after a major upheaval or realizing the consequences of their actions. Like now, he said quietly. I didn't say anything. Bryce had always been an optimist, always believing in the best in people. Even now, after everything that had happened, he wanted to believe that Veronica could change. It was touching and naive at the same time. In any case, he continued after a pause, what's done is done. You can't change the past. You can only move forward. Wise words, I said sincerely. By the way, I met someone, he added, changing the subject. A colleague from school, a literature teacher, Helena. We went for coffee a couple times. That's good. I tried to sound supportive, even though an alarm was rising inside. So soon? After everything that's happened? Don't worry, he seemed to read my mind. I'm not rushing into a new relationship. We're just hanging out. She's smart, interesting, and honest, I think. I'm happy for you, I said, this time sincerely. You deserve to be happy, Bryce. After we talked, I went out into the garden, even though the day was cool. The rose bushes had already shed their leaves, preparing for their winter sleep. I thought about the cycles of life, the losses and gains, the prices we pay for our decisions. My revenge had been accomplished. Justice, in a sense, had been served. But the victory left a bitter taste. I didn't feel triumph, only fatigue and a strange desolation. Bryce was free of Veronica, but so was I. Our relationship, though restored on the surface, remained complicated, strained with unspoken grievances and reticences. I got what I wanted, but the price was high. And as I looked at my fall garden, I realized the bitter truth. The toxic relationships in our family had not disappeared. They had simply taken on a new form. Veronica's manipulations were replaced by my manipulations. Her lies had been replaced by my reticence. Her control was replaced by my meddling. And the most cynical thing about the whole thing is that I would do it again, without hesitation. Because despite all the consequences, despite the high cost, I believed I had done the right thing, protected my son from a predator, restored justice. I did what I had to do. Perhaps that was the real toxicity. Our inability to see our own mistakes, our confidence in our own rightness, our desire to control other people's lives, even with the best of intentions. I returned to the house as it began to get dark. I turned on the light in the empty living room, looked at the pictures on the wall. Elizabeth, young Bryce, our family at the best of times. Thought of Veronica, of her promise of revenge. About Bryce and his new acquaintance, Helena. About the cycles that repeat themselves, the mistakes we make over and over again. Thinking this time will be different. And for the first time in a long time, I felt not bitterness or contentment, but simply acceptance. Life goes on with all its complexities and contradictions. And we go on with it, doing the best we can, even if that best is sometimes far from ideal. I poured myself a whiskey, the last of the whiskey for the day, and toasted to Elizabeth's ghost in the photograph. To the truth, I said quietly, however bitter it might be.